Hell yeah. I know the ears look fake, but is it just me, or does the low-budget 1990 Cap Flicks costume look so much better than the 2012 movie costume?
Did you ever notice that Captain America's costumes in the MCU are actually a reflection of Steve Rogers' personal story through the films? My name is Jared from Frost Comics, and this tweet from Mark Miller inspired me to talk about Cap and how his costume actually has its own story through Steve's film appearances. Now, aesthetics are very subjective, and I don't know specifically why Mr. Miller believes that the 90s costume is better, and my account isn't big enough to get an answer from him if I wanted to ask. But I'd guess that he believes the 90s costume was closer to the comics. Now, this is in no way throwing any disrespect in Mr. Miller's direction. He is a tremendously successful comic book writer. And in some respects, yes, this outfit is more accurate, but in many more respects, it also isn't. When you look at detailed art of Cap, you can see the point that Mark was probably making. There's none of this stuff anywhere on the original costume. Probably to keep it from looking like Cap was wearing a unitard, often the comics would kind of feather his armor, sort of make it look like chainmail. You can even see this on the cover of his first issue. He has shorts over pants, which is a classic strongman look, red leather boots. There's clearly a white compression shirt, leather gloves. The cowl is more of a cowl and less of a helmet, although none of it is rubber. So yes, while this is at a distance more immediately accurate looking, if you squint and forgot to put in your contacts or lost your glasses, or a comic accurate costume can be recreated in real life. Look at how good these cosplayers look, how authentic and true to the comic their costumes are. With the resources that Hollywood has for tailors, if they wanted the costume to be 100% accurate, it absolutely could be. And not to get off on a tangent, but I don't want to see anyone saying, oh, the 90s film was low budget, because that movie had a budget of $3 million, which, fine, yes, was low budget compared to something like Michael Keaton's Batman, which had a budget of $48 million. It's hard to find costume costs in Hollywood movie budgets, so take what I found with a grain of salt. But the Wolverine costumes in Deadpool and Wolverine cost around $100,000 to make. And even though $100,000 is only 3% of a $3 million movie budget, look, this dude didn't spend $100,000 making his costume. That's all I'm saying, okay? Anyway, whether it be comics, games, animation, there are countless new versions, variations, or takes on costumes all the time. What matters for each is the costume in the spirit of the original, and or what is the new take going for? So let's look at Cap. This is from the first Avenger, obviously. What does it look like to you? Because to me, a hopeless civilian, it looks like a soldier's uniform with some extra padding or armoring, but colored for Cap. Is that as accurate as this thing? No, but the idea was to make a gritty-looking World War II uniform that meshed with Cap's classic look. But the movie did something clever, and it had this as part of the story. Cap's USO costume was the same look used in the comics that even existed in the MCU to promote war bonds as part of the story of the first Avenger. And so when Cap returns in 2012 and wears this,
America,
it's because Phil Coulson made this costume for him. And he was inspired by the Cap trading cards from World War II that he collected as a fan. So what does it look like? It looks like a modernized USO costume, because it was supposed to. It was made by a fan who wanted to make something a little old-fashioned. You know, you have to think from Coulson's perspective. I'm sure he saw photos of Cap in action and he saw what his uniform looked like, but he also saw the propaganda. He saw the trading cards and he read the comic books, and he probably saw the propaganda films about Cap punching out Hitler. So for someone who wanted something a little old-fashioned, of course that's what Coulson would make the costume look like. My long-winded point is, there is a story behind his costumes in the MCU, and it isn't as simple as, this isn't as accurate. Marvel actually recreated his costume with almost perfect accuracy, but they wove it into the story they were telling in a different way. The 90s costume, on the other hand...
Sarge, you got that crazy fireproof uniform Dr. Vaselli made up for you.
Dr. Vaselli had all the details to the process in her head, not written down. Same for whatever she made the uniform and the shield out of.
Some scientists made it. Whatever. Let's jump out of a plane. So, yeah, there's not really a good story behind the costume or the shield or anything, really. It's just a throwaway line before he goes skydiving. So if it doesn't really have a compelling story, well, how does it look? It looks bulky and not in a good way. It doesn't look protective or muscular. It just looks kind of fat.
He's fat!
The cowl looks derpy and his chin looks weird in it. He looks kind of sleepy and retarded because of how the eye holes are. Can I say that? So like, I get how someone could advocate for the more accurate rubber suit, but it isn't really more accurate, and it's really just a preference. I don't think you could make an honestly objective case for it as a superior look. Besides, the amount of storytelling that went into an outfit, that's what the MCU used to do. The 90s suit looked like this toy became a person. But look, I don't want to pick on Stretch Armstrong too much here. After all, the point of this video isn't just to beat up on the 90s film, but rather to highlight one of the best parts of the Captain America movies from the MCU.
Allow me!
Before we close this video out talking about the rest of Steve's wardrobe though, do me a favor if you've made it this far and give this video a like, and think about sharing it with other comic book fans that you know. Speaking of which, I have a comic book of my own and it's completely free. Swing on by frostcomics.com and you can get your free copy of Morningstar Chronicles #1 just for signing up for our mailing list. Ad over. Let's go back to that collage of Cap's costumes. That's fun to say. Thanks to whoever made this and put it up on Reddit, by the way. I couldn't find your username, but kudos. So, Steve becomes disillusioned with being a USA poster boy, grabs a jacket and helmet, and goes behind enemy lines to save soldiers from Hydra. When he comes back, he's proven himself, and he starts working with Howard Stark and the best minds behind the Allied war effort to help design his World War II costume and iconic shield. Then, Phil Coulson, sorry, did I say Phil again?
Phil? His first name is Agent.
Agent Coulson created the Avengers costume, even though Steve was a bit unsure about where he stood in the world and where his old-fashioned principles stood as well.
Aren't the stars and stripes a little old-fashioned?
After Avengers, Steve is trying to find purpose, and he seeks that purpose by working for S.H.I.E.L.D., the people he worked with to save New York and the world in Avengers. I think there's something really interesting about this costume, though, something we see repeated later. And I will admit up front, I'm definitely probably finding meaning where the writers didn't intend any. Or I guess maybe where the costume designer didn't intend any. Anyway, do you notice the shade of Steve's costume? How it's a bit darker. The star isn't as bright. It's more silver than white. The costume is more navy than blue, and there's no red. The American colors, the colors that define Steve, aren't there anymore. Now, I know it is a stealth-oriented costume. That is part of the story. But I think it's also kind of symbolic of Steve's story. Without even realizing it, Steve compromised a part of himself to try to find a fit in the world he woke up in. But by the end of the movie, when he knew it was time to take a stand, even against S.H.I.E.L.D., he grabbed that replica World War II costume and both literally and symbolically returned to the core of his character, his defining characteristics. Now, admittedly, not a lot changes for Steve as a character in Age of Ultron, and so his costume doesn't change much either. Just enough to justify a new toy line. But in Civil War, Steve's costume, again tweaked slightly, stays true to his principles. He stands by his friend, stays true to his convictions, and while again this is all probably unintentional, it's reflected by his uniform. I'm going to cap this off with his costume from Infinity War. I have complicated feelings about Endgame, and I think my little pet costume theory loses water by the time Endgame rolls around. But going back to Infinity War, we can see Cap's star is now black, and his red and white midsection is now black and gray. Why? Well, I think it's because Cap is in mourning for the death of the Avengers. The group is split up, and I think these colors are almost an expression of grief being worn by the former leader of the team. So, what do you think? Am I reaching? Or in a post-death of the author world, does this crazy interpretation of mine have some merit? Let me know in the comments below. If you like MCU-related content, you might want to go ahead and hit subscribe too. I'm going to be hosting a series of live streams discussing the MCU and the writing of each film. On each stream, I'll be joined by different comic book writers and artists as we talk about the writing of each film. Was it great? Was it awful? Did it have an impact on its sequel's box office? Join us and let us know what you think in the chat. It should be a lot of fun, and I can't wait to see you there. And as always, an enormous thank you to my patrons, and hey, I got two now. Felipe, Curtis, I can't thank you enough. If you want to contribute to my comic book production or videos like these, please consider going to patreon.com/frostcomics and becoming patron number 3. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.
That's America's ass.